Hi, how's your dog doing? Anyway, I want to start this video by saying that this video will not involve evolving Toki Pona. Already made a video on that recently. If Toki Pona were a real language, where would it come from, and how would it get to the point it's at now? So this is just my personal idea as to why Toki Pona is the way it is if it were a natural language. So if you were to ask me, I'd start by saying that Toki Pona is actually the middle form of the language. It may seem like it's a proto-language because of its simplicity, but it has a few things that make it a bit odd if it were one, at least in my opinion. For example, some of the particles li, e, la, pi, etc. are a bit specific for a proto-language. Let's get to the really interesting stuff. I'd say that Toki Pona is a language isolate that can be found maybe around Germany and the Netherlands. Since Toki Pona is originally based on Tok Pisin, a Creole language with a lot of influence from English, I'd assume that Toki Pona was influenced a lot by English. Since Toki Pona has a lot of Esperanto-based vocabulary, it would probably exist in its current form around the 20th century. It also has quite a bit of influence from Finnish, Croatian, and Dutch, so I'd say the general area I propose isn't too bad. However, I have no idea how it would naturally get vocabulary from Japanese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Swahili, Tongan, and Akan. Let's just write that off as trade network or something, I don't know. So, since I claim that Toki Pona would be the middle version of the language, what is the proto-language like? Let's start with the phonology. Toki Pona has these phonemes: pa, ta, ka, la, wa, ya, na, ma, sa, a, e, I, o, u. Since there's no voice variance for p, ta, and ka, sounds that very easily gained voice variance, I'm going to say that Proto-Toki Pona had a similar phonology. I am, however, going to say this. Toki Pona has 5 vowels, but it only needs 3. So I'm going to say that e arrived from people opening e up a little bit, and that o came from people saying u after a k or y sound. Except when it comes to k, I'd say that o was said when there was an n after u. So kon would be kun in the past. And of course, some other words would be added later after the sound changes, so I'd say that ko was one of these words added later. What was the vocabulary in the proto-language like? I'm going to say that quite a few of the words were borrowings from other languages other than the Esperanto words, of course. I'd say that most of the English/Tok Pisin vocabulary would be added around the 18th, 19th century, with most of the other vocabulary being added at various points in time. Though maybe some of the Esperanto vocabulary in Toki Pona was originally Romance language and Germanic language vocabulary that just so happened to end up being similar to Esperanto's words. Toki Pona's grammar would be even more simple than it already is. I'm going to say that li and pi were not used the way they are now. I'm going to say that li used to be a verb meaning to be that was originally used for first, second, and third person, but eventually started being used only for the third person, and then it became the predicate marker we know it as today. Similar to how in inflected languages like Latin, you don't need to say pronouns. If you want to say I see it, you just say id video, and not ego id video. It's not the same thing, but it's a similar concept. Using li would only be useful when you're talking about a third person, because when you say me or sina, it's pretty obvious what's being referred to. I'd say that pi used to just mean of, similar to how Spanish uses de, but then eventually people decided to use nouns like loye, for example, as adjectives and put them right after the noun, which then would kind of establish the idea that words can take any part of speech. La would probably have a very similar function to the one it currently has, but it would be simpler and it would probably just mean if and wouldn't have the other uses it has now. I'd say that e would just come from some word meaning to or at, which then became a direct object marker with tawa coming from a word meaning to go, which is one of the uses tawa has in Toki Pona now. Loan might have been a kind of replacement for li once li became a predicate marker and no longer was a verb, which also became used as a preposition meaning in, at, or on. Hey, so this is just something I thought of while editing that I actually think is a better idea for where lon came from. A better idea would be that lon came sort of as a kind of stative verb similar to estar in Spanish. For those who aren't familiar, Spanish actually has 2 verbs meaning to be, ser y estar. Generally, ser is for more permanent things like who you are, traits you have, your occupation, where you're from, stuff like that, whereas estar is used for more impermanent things like how you feel or the location you're at. I think it's more probable that loan would come up as a verb showing location, like estar is used to show, because that would more easily explain why you can even use it to mean in, at, or on, instead of it coming after li became a predicate marker. I mean, it's still possible that loan came after li as a replacement for it, but I find it to be more likely that it would come as a state of verb showing location that eventually just adopted the characteristics of showing something being it, at, or on something, instead of the other idea, which could work, but doesn't make as much sense as it being used as a state of verb that which came to be also used commonly as a preposition. I think a word like o developing is pretty easy. It would just arise as a sound people would use to get someone's attention, like saying hey or psst. Anyway, that's what I have so far for this crazy idea I came up with. If you'd like to see another video like this, I could potentially make a series where I develop a proto-language for Toki Pona to come from, or maybe I can do this for other conlangs or languages. For example, maybe I'd come up with a viable version of Old English based on the version of English we have right now. I think that would be a pretty cool idea to try out. Anyway, tell your dog I said hi. Mitaba. Hello, this is me coming from editing again. I also just wanted to say that I'm coming at this from the perspective that Toki Pona's proto-language was actually a simpler one than the one we have now. It's possible, but less probable that Toki Pona came from a more complex language. Similar to how pretty much all Indo-European languages have less inflectional morphology than Proto-Indo-European. I don't really know how Toki Pona's proto-language would have been more complex than it already is, or maybe Toki Pona could have been some kind of Creole. I don't know. That's really something I can't answer. I'm just coming at it from the perspective that it is its own language and it had a simpler proto-language. I also haven't talked about any Toki Pona inspired languages like Toki Ma, for example. Maybe I can make some sort of follow-up video talking about how all the languages descended from Toki Pona came to be in a natural setting. That would actually be a pretty interesting idea, but yeah, it'll probably be a while until you see that. My upload schedule definitely has not been 1 to 2 weeks for the past couple of months. Of course, I will give my attention to the series I've already started, like the IPA series or the PIE series, or even Philosophy Fault Finder, but I'm just trying to branch out a bit and make whatever video ideas come into my head. Alright, that's all.